Okay, hi everybody, it's Richard Munn. For those who don't know, I'm a portrait photographer in the UK. Pretty excited today. I'm talking with somebody I met nearly a decade ago, actually, in retreat, Austin Hill Shore. He's the author of The Shoreline of Wonder, the founder of Creativity Matters, and also a member of the National Speaking Association. We're here today to talk about where creativity and mindfulness meet, which is a subject very close to my heart. It's what motivates me really with my photography practice and painting practice. So I thought I'd start with a brief quote from a photographer I really love called Dan Winters. I was lucky enough to spend some time with him in person, and we've got this huge tome of a book just filled with really beautiful photography, and it's kind of an artistic autobiography. So he starts the book: "My purpose in writing this book is rooted in a desire to share, on a human level, some of the moments in my life that have significance to me as a photographer and as a man. While all of life's moments are sacred, our ability to perceive their subtleties is often elusive. Perception can be achieved with a modicum of effort when we allow ourselves to stop. When we cease to do and allow ourselves to be, we can fully savor the moments as they flow over us. I have found that I'm able to see much more clearly when I'm doing the least. Being conscious is the key to seeing. By being aware of what is around us and then noticing that awareness, we allow our vision and perception to grow. It's very difficult to do this on a regular basis. Stillness is a life practice." And like, I was fortunate enough that Dan made my portrait in the workshop, and what I got with this sense of meeting Dan was this huge sense of warmth, availability, connection, and that when he started to work, all of that connection and sensibility just came together in this kind of, like they talk about the razor's edge, it just came together in this such kind of sharp focused point, that you clearly knew, okay, it's time to get to work. We're making something here. And I know, Austin, like that's sort of how you feel to me as well. There's a lot being taken in, and then that becomes refined and very, very focused into an architectural project or a book project, or working with a client, having a conversation.
I misheard your last question there.
Yeah, it was really like how that process shows up for you, or sort of in a way where the rubber meets the road in terms of creativity and mindfulness.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately what we're going for, and I think Joseph Campbell kind of talked about it best. He said something to the effect that, I don't think we're interested in the meaning of life so much as we're interested in the experience of being alive. And I'm paraphrasing. I'm always paraphrasing. And my memory doesn't allow me to do anything else. But anyways, I think that, ultimately in our lives is that we are looking for that kind of sweet spot, what people call the zone, what people call flow states, and those places where we feel like we feel this sense of deep, intimate connection with the world, but we also feel like we're making a difference, that we're actually doing something to better the world, whether it be locally or globally, with our family or with our coworkers. And so it's really kind of that we're the passive, just that passive experience of our felt sense of interdependence, meeting that action that we're doing, whatever it is in the moment, that I think is so, that's really what makes us feel alive. And often it's seen as something kind of rare, it's like, oh, you're in the zone a little bit of the time, or maybe you'll hear about police officers who have, been in combat and everything seems to slow down. And so it's sort of, it seems as though it's an exotic state. But from my point of view, is it actually, it's the state. It is the most human state of them all. And it's, it's synonymous with creative flow, what I call self-expression. And that self-expression is, it's a word we've heard many times, but it took me years to come to that name for it. And really what it comes from is the perennial philosophy, where, and sort of Carl Jung as well, where you have this idea of an egoic identity, a sense of our small self. But then there's this sort of the big self with a capital S, which is basically our ongoing intimate connection with everything that's always already available. And so self-expression, if you kind of look at it, this flow state, it is that experience of ourselves opening up, right? That profound connectedness, which is described best by the mystics, being channeled through finite actions, decisions, movements, whatever it is that we're doing, so that we're pairing these sort of paradoxical worlds, the infinite with the finite. And that to me is that's probably that is the Ranger's edge to me. How can we be open and deliberate at the same time? And from my experience, you learn to do that through a couple different things. One, working on your experience of connection, which is in creativity, that's the experience of insight. It's cultivating those propensity for aha moments. The second is affecting the world, and or making a difference. And that's really the work that we do, the craft, the 10,000 hours, the whatever we're doing that we're working on to get better at it. And then the third component, which I think is absolutely essential, is the meaning that we're creating, that we're actively creating around what we're doing. And meaning is essential. And meaning can take the form of two different levels. It can be one, the vision and mission that we craft for our lives, but it also has that felt sense of meaning that comes from being in flow states itself. Those are experiences beyond meaning. They're beyond words, but they're deeply meaningful. And so those are the different areas that when I'm working with people work on, like, how can we get you to feel more connected? How can we get you better at what you're doing? And how can we bring meaning to your life? And again, since creativity, and at least the way I see it, is that it's not a gift of certain people and not others, but a defining trait of what it means to be human. It's not so much of adding things. It's not an additive process by which we become more creative, but a subtractive, by pulling away the obstacles that are there that are not necessarily allow us to have that felt sense of being alive, of being in those flow states. They usually have to do with traumas or childhood patterning or limiting beliefs, all sorts of different things the baggage that we carry around with us. And, as Chogyam Trungpa would say, that's not something to be thrown out. It's something to be worked with directly. That is actually the manure, the fertilizer that brings forth our creative gifts. Mm. So there's certainly a process of transmutation in there as well. Converting our stuck emotions and our stuck patterns into, and liberating them into flow states and creative inspiration.
Yeah, I think that seems to be a really important piece, which is that creativity is what we are, or in a way why we're here. We're obviously biologically we're made to create. We're made to have offspring. We're made to create. We're made to connect. We're made to kind of bring forth something new. And then maybe if you think in terms of the chakras or something like that, that's from there. And then as we kind of move up those, then that same sort of creative impulse is always wanting to come through. So I really love that you're presencing that. It made me think a little bit of Lucian Freud, I think, and he said there are certain things that people say to me that I automatically want to stop talking to them, and one of them was, it must be really fantastic to be creative, to be and he just thought, oh, come on, because for him it was that labor, it was that craft, and it was a natural thing. I love what he said about I think imagination is paying attention closely enough to something where something that then something novel comes out. Mm-hmm. So he would draw or paint these very kind of portraits of an egg, for example, and people would think, well, you can't how do you make a portrait of an egg? It's an egg, it's just a, and he would do these things, a portrait of 3 eggs, and he would try and really find the personality of each egg, but it wasn't because he was being sort of flighty or creative or what. It was, it really came through the craft and the labor and that kind of rigorous attention that he was bringing to something. And so I was curious, like, what kind of blockages do you do sort of people come to you with, and they're kind of like, how do people tend to get blocked?
Well, I think, there's different ways of looking at it. I think it's all under the sort of the realm of samskara. It's the imprinting, the patterning that's been there. And there's 3 principal sources that I've noticed. One is your paternal lineage, right? Everything that was kind of handed down by the male aspect of your genetic programming, right? And typically, especially in the West, there's been a lot of patriarchy, there's been a lot of alcoholism, there's been a lot of, ways in which we've kind of turned away from the natural state of aliveness. And that often shows up within the sort of paternal bloodline, right? And then on the other side, there's the maternal side, which is, we've been kind of because we've been in patriarchy, there's been aspects of the feminine that have actually been sort of shut down. One of them being, the feminine's ability to be so receptive to the world around it and sense connectivity and way more than the masculine can. And I'm using this as masculine and feminine because I think these exist within men and women, right? Even though there's propensities within each one of the genders for one or the other. So those are the 2, you can see how that works. And then there's culturally too, how those are playing out also within the paternal and the maternal lineages. Living in Oakland, I work with people of all different sorts of heritage and races, African Americans, Chinese, Vietnamese, white, Jewish, Muslim, Indian, and you see how patterns that are handed down both culturally and religiously, right? So those are basically, again, what's handed down through the maternal and paternal lineages and the cultural lineages that are associated with that. But then there's another piece, which I think is, and actually a word that comes out of shamanism is tonali, which basically means soul piece. And like, for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, the idea is in conception, not only the male and the female parts coming together, but consciousness is entering in as well. And consciousness, to me, I think that's the 3rd element, which actually, it can be cobbled together from a lot of different things. And, you see people who have come into this world with distinct patterns that don't necessarily go along with the paternal lineage nor the maternal lineage, but have something to do with some other story that's playing out. And so all of us have them. And, some people would, some people argue whether there's past lives or not. I don't want to argue whether they're there or not. Even just within the maternal and paternal lines, those patterns that your parents are playing out, that's raw material within itself. But all these different areas are basically, like, there's another concept from Tibetan Buddhism, which is basically the idea of terma. And terma are basically revealed teachings. So it's the idea that a realized teacher or being will look at his or her students and say, I have a teaching, but these people aren't ready for it. So I'm going to bury it until they are. And it might not even be for future generations. I love that metaphor for our own lives, because when we're kids, we go through experiences when we're looking at the godlike adults above us, and, they don't always behave well. And it's not that they should. They're imperfect people as well. They're perfectly imperfect, right? And yet at the same time, I think that we shut off portions of ourselves when that happens that become our own personal terma. That when the time comes, maybe it's a midlife crisis, maybe it's a trauma. Sometimes it can happen early in life. I work with addicts sometimes that, have had near-death experiences at 17, 18, 19 years old, right? They, even though they see themselves as so bad, I'm like, you've gone through something that people, they've been handed a gift on some levels, that they're like seeing the finality of life, right? And then they're ready and ripe to unpack things that need to be unpacked at that point, right? So the healing work is basically just looking at those patterns that are playing out based on defense structures and survival, both physical survival, but also emotional and even spiritual survival. And then when you get into that, when you see the fear, that, and just by being with it and loving it and appreciating it, it starts to transmute into raw, ardent fuel for your creative expression, right? I think that's why there's such a close correlation between people's calling and the biggest challenge that they've had in their lives. As one, my mission is to empower others as creators. And the reason that I do that is because when I was in architecture school, like sometimes I was on, and just cruising with an idea, and sometimes I was not, and I was stuck. And when I was on, I felt like ecstatic and alive. And when I was shut down and watching my fellow students sort of surge ahead of me, gosh, I felt like I was dying, like literally dying. And so, I wanted to understand why that was going on. It's part of my wound, like one, feeling in the moment, but also feeling the pain of being out of the moment. So, and I think that anyone out there can view, like, if you really look like this is the hardest experience of my life, if you identify the most difficult, but also the most joyful, right in there, you're going to start to find out what you're here to do in the world, right? So.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think it's interesting. I've been speaking to a few people recently, and that theme has come up a bit, like, what am I going to do? And like, definitely for me as well, like, interestingly, even when I started to pursue creative things, it was really easy to fall into that sort of trap of like, well, I want to do something creative, but I still have to play it safe, or something like this, and you're always just trying to learn to swim by dipping your toe in, and then when I really started to sort of do the work, it was like completely exciting and exhilarating, and like just getting punched directly in the face at the same time. It was just like, okay, like, this is now it just got interesting. It's like, and I think just kind of having that that kind of clarity that, like, okay, this is a good thing, even though it like, it can feel very confusing, but just kind of having that bit of a North Star of like, okay, this means I'm actually on the right track.
Yeah, it's having trust. I mean, this is not shameless self-promotion, but this is my book, okay? And the reason I wanted to just bring this up is that, it took me 8 years to write this thing, okay? And so it's this thing that basically, and it took me that long because I'm wrestling with something that's sort of a universally appealing. But the reason I bring it up is because the last chapter about this is all about my most transformative experience of my life, which is basically becoming a father. Because I'd set myself up, as basically when I met the woman who became my wife at 38 years old, I was a very individualized consciousness, okay? And even though I had been a meditator for 6 or 7 years at that point, I still was very much in the mindset about it was all about me, right? And so shortly after that, we were found out we were pregnant on April Fool's Days of all days, right? And that began just the most terrifying experience of my life, which is this, and it was terrifying because I had to undo that individualized consciousness, that individualized self-centered kind of like boy man or man boy, whatever you call it, in order so that it could actually be a father and a husband, right? And so even though this is all, it's about inspiration, the whole book, the last chapter is called Pulling It All Apart. And it means the transformative aspects that you need to go through when you live a truly creative life. Because again, at our core, we are all creators. But through our lives, we accrete things onto it, like barnacles onto the hull of a ship, right? And so the chipping away of that can be painful. But when you see that it's that transformative process, like Viktor Frankl said, that is to give light. What is to give light must endure burning. That is the process of creativity. We have to kind of put ourselves in the cauldron of our own lives. And by doing that, we start to feel more connected. We really feel energized because we're no longer weighed down by, again, those things that we've been using to defend ourselves against the world before. Does that make sense? And so that idea of being punched in the face, I get it. It's like, it's paradoxical. How could I feel so alive and yet feel like I'm going off the rails at the same time, right? It's because you're entering into new magnitudes of your life. It's like, but that is part of the spiritual path. I mean, initially people kind of get into a spiritual path so that they can sort of move from confusion into sort of wisdom. And that's the initial thing. And that's a great thing to do in the beginning. But as you move on, you recognize, hey, now that I'm actually can work more with the world more skillfully, bring more confusion on, all right? I can handle it. I can actually be like a sinkhole for other people's confusion. Bring it on, right? That's the whole Tonglen practice. And that's what you see when you're working with people who are really, truly creative in their life and truly, wakeful on some aspect. They are willing to take on the karma of others. They're willing to let other people's projections, illusions, and things to wash through them and say, yes, and reflect it back to them. That's not serving you. So I see mindfulness and creativity, spirituality and creativity, they're no different, right? They're all integrated, right? A really simple map I have in terms of understanding how it works in our own lives, your body is kind of a scientific body because science is all about what you can measure and see, right? And that's kind of on the low end, right? At the top end, we have spirit, which deals with kind of religion, okay? And the spirit is the most ineffable, hard to reach, but the most enduring aspect of who we are, okay? And that's, so, we have science over here, we have religion over here. In the middle of that, we have art, okay? Art basically draws upon both of those things, right? A good artist is one, they're working with the realities of the world, the scientific realities. They're not going against the laws of nature, and yet they're bringing something in that's completely inspiring and new, right? And it's not because it's new in terms of it's novel, because it's new because it's alive and fresh and in a perpetual state of becoming, right? So again, you have science at the body level, art at the mind level, and then religion at the spirit level. Creativity is what they would call the svabhavakaya. It's the sum total of everything, right? Creativity draws upon that. Your aha moment is a religious experience that's best described by the mystics. It's an opening up to the ineffable truths, the felt sense of truth that are beyond words, okay? And then you bring it down, come down from the mountain, and you try to translate that in some way to actual form. That's manifestation. And that's where the science, the technology, the craft comes into play. And then when you do that artfully, when you're drawing on both, that's when, and I think that's when the self-expression is occurring, where you're getting, one, a sense of that individual who's expressing something, but two, the tides of eternity that are moving through that individual, if that makes sense. You really get a sense of that there's something way bigger. And you see it in great performers, you see them great speakers, you see them in great healers, people who are just, they know to say the exact right thing in order to make a person feel not only better in the short term, but in the long term, right? It's those are all aspects of self-expression there.
Yeah, and there's that sense of each of those pieces is really important.
Mm-hmm. And each of those can be cultivated individually, so that, again, that was the thing about creativity, is this huge universal thing. It's almost overwhelming, right? But yet we can start to break it down into the component parts. Okay, what can we do with our body in order to be more creative? What can we do with our minds to be more creative? What can we do with our spirits to be more creative, right? All those things.
It's a kind of funny synchronicity. You brought up the Viktor Frankl quote. That used to be on the wall of when I used to train in MMA.
Mm-hmm.
I'd walk through the door and it was like, what must give off light must endure burning. And it was kind of like, yeah, okay. Um, and it's obviously very clearly like a physical practice, right? There was me, and then there was these big fucking dudes basically, and it was just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna go through it,
Yeah, yeah.
um
That's
but
really good. Kudos to you.
but I mean, the nice thing, it was like, again, like, I think just through the physical intensity, and I think this is probably something you experienced with rock climbing as well,
Yeah.
that just you're forced into this position that actually something else has to start kind of switching on, because you just have to, what's the analogy, kind of like with an engine, you have to, more pistons kind of have to start working for you to be able to kind of operate. Or
You have to co-create. That's the thing. I think that, initially when we start doing something new, we think, okay, I have to learn this, right? And it's a sense of me, you're the center of it, and you're trying to take something on. But I think when you start to master something, you recognize it's actually not about me. It's about, as the Taoists would call Wu Wei, the actionless non-doing, where you start to realize, okay, I'm initiating some of this, but there's all these other things around me that are helping me do what I do. Right? So if you think of Aikido, that the idea of using the other person's of energy in order to accomplish the goal that you're after. I think you can apply that to anything. But you have to go through the sort of the clumsiness and sort of 2 left feet experience of being a beginner. It's not a bad thing. But as we move through those stages, it's like, when I was on in rock climbing, I realized what I loved about it is I was in a flow state. It put me there. I had to concentrate. I had to manage my fear. But I was also going, I climbed outdoors. I climbed up beautiful walls, thousands of feet high, and it was exhilarating. And just, and even the way you do it, you climb, so you're totally focused, hyper focused on what you're doing. And the more difficult it is, the harder, the more you're focused. And then you get to a belay ledge and you're belaying your partner. And then you can just look around and take out the sweeping view. So it's like this concentrated awareness and then this expansive awareness, concentrated awareness and expansive awareness. And when you're fully on, they're both happening at once while you're in the moment, right? And those are the times where it's just like, it was said, what a great thing to do as a young man. Testosterone, just like climbing. It was a perfect thing. And now in creativity, like I can get in those flow states without climbing. I can be talking to my daughter. I can be giving a talk. I can be writing. I can be talking to you, everything has this potential by which, again, we start to bring in the infinite aspect, which is always part of our lives, with the finite, one sentence, one word, one letter, one conversation, those sorts of things. And then you sort of see this web of relatedness. It's amazing.
I love it. So, like, before we talked, I put a thing out if anyone's got any questions. And what I wanted to do as well is like give you a bit of context for each person's question, right? So rather than it, like, a bit of context. So Jennifer, who is a very experienced web designer, loves music, nature, travel, and photography. Mm-hmm. Which is what I love as well. So good for Jennifer.
Yeah.
Are there ways to focus our attention that can lead to better ideas?
Are there ways to focus our attention so that they can lead to better ideas? Okay, so this is the paradox of creative thinking. Okay, the paradox of creative thinking is that it's actually not about thought at all. It's about the space in between thoughts. Okay, and I'm specifically talking about creative insight. Okay, those aha moments. So the reason that we feel stuck is because we're in our heads, right? We're working at the mental or conceptual level, right? And so the way that we start to generate different ideas is by getting out of our heads. And there's two ways we do that. One, we go down into the body, either by going for a walk, taking a hot shower, going into nature. Nature's a great way because it's non-conceptual space, right? That's the beauty of being in nature. You're no longer in people's sea of ideas when you're in a city. You're in unscripted, unconceptual, non-conceptual space, right? The same thing applies to spiritual practices, things such as fasting, things such as prayer. Meditation actually put to the level of mind because you're working with your cultivating the space between thoughts itself, right? But even things like vision quests, there's sacred substances out there that people ingest. There's all sorts of ways in which either people go below concept or transcend concept. And that is where new ideas come from, right? I think that, the basic type of meditation that Richard and I practiced was something called shamatha vipassana, okay? Shamatha means dwelling in peace, and vipassana means insight. So by dwelling in peace, right, by basically watching the breath and being with the breath, and when you're noticing your thinking, just saying thinking and letting it go and returning to the breath, the result of that is insight, okay? So the thing is when you're going for new ideas, don't try to cultivate ideas. Go about trying to cultivate experiences, okay? Openness, things that put you in your body or that allow you to transcend, Another way of transcendence for me, which starts at the conceptual realm, is poetry. If you read a poem that's like, some of those poems are just like, they're like portals to eternity. So you can do things with concepts, but again, it's about elevating. It's about getting out of this idea that, I'm an individualized consciousness over here, and I have to come up with ideas in my head. Insights are gifted to you. They're actually passive and they come to you. So it's about opening, right? And the way that we open up as human beings is by getting out of our heads, okay? And she's a web designer as well, that's right?
Yeah.
It also means removing yourself from technology, being really disciplined about it. Work within the technology when you're using it, but don't check your email first thing in the morning. That is the worst thing you can do. The more you're filling yourself with concepts, that just kills your ability to attain, how should I say, insights. Even caffeine, like, focuses, your attention. If you use too much of it, again, you don't have that more expansive awareness. So these are all things that you can start to play with, okay? Alcohol, on the other hand, can be something that when it's used in moderation, as something that, again, relaxes your tendency to sort of focus in on something, to hone in, okay? So next time you go out for happy hour, make it really, creative happy hour. Make it insight hour. So
insight and whiskey hour. That's
insight and whiskey hour, exactly. Yeah.
And I suppose one piece on that is like the mindfulness is that when that insight actually occurs, sometimes it can be really dramatic, and sometimes it's just like that little blip, right? So the mindfulness piece is that you actually recognize that kind of the seed of that inspiration has actually just popped up, and sometimes they're really easy to miss.
They are, exactly. Like, the aha moment, the aha moment is difficult to miss, right? It's really kind of powerful. But yet you're right, there are these mini aha moments. And usually meditators sort of get bummed about it because they're like, oh, I was thinking again, right? If you're not supposed to be thinking and then such you catch yourself thinking, typically a meditator will be like, oh, shoot, I'm thinking again. But really that is your awareness. That is the awareness beyond thought that's saying, hey, did you notice you're thinking again? So as Richard said, those are the ways in which we start to actually recognize that insights are actually happening all the time. They're always there. The potential is always there. I love what you just said, Richard. That's so cool.
Love it. This one's an interesting one. So Dolores, she's been a teacher for 20 years and has a new business empowering other teachers to become more motivated, creative, and powerful. So she's asking, how can I use mindfulness to help my kids, students, or staff be more creative, or come up with more creative solutions. So I kind of guess we covered it a bit, but it's also, it's interesting there for me. In the question, she's saying, I'm not clear whether or not she's saying, how can I use mindfulness so when I interact with my kids, students, and staff, or how can I get my kids, students, and staff to be more mindful? So maybe a bit on that.
So I thought about this a lot, you know, and it's and again, I think how to say, you know, I've learned about creativity through a lot of things, like architecture, meditation, climbing, and things of that sort. And as I've learned about it, you know, initially I came up with a framework which was pretty, you know, I thought was pretty powerful. And yet, even though it was really interesting to me, I recognize it's, you know, maybe not as interesting to everybody out there, okay? But I think, well, what is actually of interest to other people? And really, I think it's the core emotional needs that we have, okay? And so even though we've talked a lot about mindfulness, there's a lot of people that they hear the word mindfulness and they want to run, you know, in the opposite direction as fast as they can, okay? And that's totally fine because that's where they're starting from. So as a teacher, we always have to build bridges between, you know, who we're working with, right? One of the continuums that I work with, you know, with my clients is that on the one hand, everybody wants to love and be loved, okay? It's just sort of universal. We all want to actively love and we want to feel loved as well, okay? And on the other hand, hurt people. And that's a kind of a saying from the prison system. The hurt people hurt people. The meanest people in the yard are the ones that have been hurt the most, okay? And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And it's also a way important thing to keep in mind in our own understanding, okay? So you have people along this spectrum, some who are on the love side, some people are on the hurt side, okay? Then you can start looking at the core emotional needs. Again, that love is like everybody wants to feel connected, okay? We are social creatures. There was an article in Scientific American that said, how did Homo sapiens conquer the world? It's because they cooperated, okay? They had a propensity to cooperate, not only with family members, but with other people that they didn't know, right? So that they kind of learn to work together. That is connection, okay? Connection to the world, connection to the people around us, connection to our environments. That's connection, okay? And so you can start to talk about, as opposed to talking about creativity directly, which can be overwhelming, it's like, what makes you feel connected? Because when people find themselves in the sense of connection, it leads to those experiences of insight, okay? The other thing is this desire to make a difference, really the active portion of wanting to, you know, affect the world in some sort of a meaningful way. Like we want to do things. We want to feel like our lives matter. And so you can look at people and ask them, how do you make your life matter? You know, what makes your life, you know, what makes you feel good about what you do? And even you can ask, what makes you feel like a buffoon, right? What do you feel like you don't do very well? Because that's where you start to build teams around people who, here's a person's strength and let's pair them so that they can both do what they love doing and are good at and don't have to worry about, you know, working on the stuff that they're not good at, right? And then, so that's the manifestation portion. When people start to see what they're good at, you know, that's the active pull of being a creator. And then again, the third thing is meaning, okay? And this is where I think it's important for kids and adults, staff members to craft their mission and their vision, right? The vision is a sense of where am I going in my life? And the mission is why I'm going there, okay? And so I'm pulled this up. Richard told me about this earlier. This is like a chart that I'm working on, you know, like I'm always trying to bring creativity into understanding new ways so that people can understand it. But you can see that in this intersection of connection, making a difference, and meaning, you know, in this case, we have innovation at the center, which is, to me, is fruitional creativity. But it's basically, it starts to happen naturally. And then at a physical level, again, you're working with your physical body, your mental sphere, and then your spirit as well. So there's practices that you can bring forth for that. And as you can see, I'm still working on this, but you know, I could make this available to the people out there because I think this is a really helpful chart in understanding how people are going to start to do things, you know. And this is the same information, just in sort of written form, so people can understand that. But the main thing is one, recognizing that you're a creator first and foremost, and that everybody else is a creator, and that your job as a teacher, more than anything, is to help people activate their innate creativity. while you're activating your own. You don't have to be a perfect creator to do that. That can be part of your vision. I just want to see myself as one who is helping others bring forth their creative gifts while I bring forth mine, and we do it together. That's a great teacher right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the fourth, Michelle, it's kind of close to you. She's a speech designer and idea architect. So she really helps people craft words to communicate, help people communicate their vision most powerfully.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but maybe kind of go a bit deeper into it. So how can technology both help and hinder mindfulness? So you're talking about that, waking up, oh, what did the emails say? Oh, lost it.
Yeah. Say that again, Richard.
Yeah, so I mean, it was like we spoke earlier about the checking emails first thing and how that can be a bit of a killer. But I'm curious, like, what other things do you see? What are good ways? You were mentioning some sort of practical ones of just like, okay, so don't do that then. Don't check your emails first thing in the morning. Be really disciplined about technology and sensitive to the way it affects you.
Yeah.
But yeah, just say a bit more on that.
Yeah. So as Westerners, I'm going to talk specifically about Westerners and kind of modern humans, in general, is like we are dealing with more information than, unprecedented amounts of information out there. And the title of my book is called The Shoreline of Wonder on Being Creative. And it comes from a quote from a Methodist minister. I thought it was from Houston Smith, who's a religious scholar, but I realized actually he was quoting somebody else. But basically the quote is this: the larger the island of knowledge, the longer the shoreline of wonder. Okay? The larger the island of knowledge, the longer the shoreline of wonder. So the sort of myth of technology is by getting things moving faster, getting more information at greater speeds, is that we're going to be better off. And actually what we're realizing is that in the last decade, suicide rates have gone up 31% worldwide. Okay? And so what we're getting to, we're starting to see that we're almost like entering the decadent phase of technology, where we're recognizing, okay, this is pretty good stuff, but we're kind of destroying the biosphere. We feel overwhelmed. We feel disconnected, even though we have the internet. And so what do we need to do instead? So again, active side, okay, of creativity, the manifestation portion really benefits from creativity when it's used mindfully, right? It's amazing that we can use these Google Hangouts, right? It's amazing that I can use spreadsheets to organize time and budgets, okay? It's amazing that I have calendars that I can sync with other people, right? But the other part of it, the checking the Facebook and seeing the little red dot and getting a squirt of dopamine and being like, whoa, that is the stuff that basically becomes an addiction. And if you ask me what the opposite of creativity is, it's addiction, okay? So while we're working with with technology, we have to be mindful about the portion that it's serving. And it's the portion of it that it's able to help us with is basically making a difference, okay? The active sphere. But there's two other spheres that need cultivation as well. Again, the beingness that has nothing to do with absorbing information, and also the meaning, okay? The meaning that, meaning really doesn't come from technology. Technology can serve your meaning, but it can't come from that. So and in the same way that your mind is a great tool, but it's a terrible master. Your heart is really the thing that needs to be in charge. Or another way is the self. Again, that sense of connection to the greater good, the bigger universe, right? That, when you put that in service, okay, with the technology, then it becomes a whole different thing. Okay, it's not something that's running you, you are utilizing it. But it's so sexy and sophisticated, you have to be extra vigilant about it. It can be insidious in your life. You can find yourself just walking into the toilet and just, sitting there and scrolling through emails. You have to actively create rules around your technology so that you know when to use it and when to put it aside. And it's a huge addiction for a lot of people, right? And of course, addiction being the opposite of creativity, you got to watch out for it. So I hope that's a bit helpful. And let me, in a book that I would totally guarantee, like one of my favorite books of 2000, I think I read in 2013, In the Realm of the Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction by Gabor Mate, where he looks at basically IV drug users in Vancouver, and then, but then shines the spotlight on all of us and says, hey, we're all addicted to things and this is why. And again, on reading that book, I used to think the opposite of creativity was destruction, but it's really paired opposite. You know, you destroy something every time you create something. It's part of life. But addiction is that propensity to go into either material places or conceptual realms or even spiritual experiences that prevent us from actually relating to the world as it is. Okay, it corresponds with Chogyam Trungpa's book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which is an unbelievable read as well.
I really like that distinction you're making, actually, because I was talking with a friend recently about the role of critique, and she's very, very good at kind of giving critiques, various sort of theoretical critiques and things like that. And I, you know, I did my kind of time in that world as well, and I'm really moved out of it. And when I was speaking with her, I ended up saying that you know, creation is critique. Like every time I, you know, want to create something, really, there is that sense of like I need to destroy something else to sort of clear space and actually provide fertile ground. And I'm also critiquing, like if I make a certain kind of portrait, to a certain extent, I'm critiquing another kind of portrait. So, you know, my portrait, I don't ever want to make a portrait of a sort of plastic person, you know, but we see lots and lots of magazines, you know, and even people like Miley Cyrus now are coming out and kind of saying that they didn't have negative self-esteem from looking at photographs of other people. They had negative self-esteem because they were looking at photographs of themselves, and they'd been made to look like somebody else. So they, you know, they were saying, well, I can't live up to the photograph of myself, which is, you know, it's insane when you think about it. So, you know, a big thing for me is like I'm critiquing that kind of photography because I'm making a picture where somebody can relate to that, and they say, yes, you know, that is me, or that speaks to something that's very, very important to me. You know, it actually kind of communicates my values and my story, and you know, and something about me. But I have been wondering, like, okay, what is, well, you know, if it's not destruction, what is the opposite to creativity? And that hadn't clicked for me, actually, that addiction piece. Now you've said it makes a lot of sense, because it's, you know, if I'm ever feeling addicted to something, it's like super kind of narrow, you know, there's not many possibilities, you know, it's just kind of like the white knuckle time. And, you know, and even meditation can feel like that, can't it? You know, you're kind of like locked in there and you think, oh, fuck.
Exactly. You can get addicted. Yeah, exercise, food, you can get addicted to television shows, you can get addicted to creative flow. You know, you could be addicted to, it's like, oh, I just want to be back in that state. You know, lots of performers go through that anxiety, right? And so anything, again, that starts to become a need, you know, in place of the real needs that we need, connection, making a difference, and having meaning in our lives, that starts to sort of co-opt that. That's, you know, that's what we got to be on. We got to look out for that stuff. And it doesn't mean that anything's inherently bad either. It's just how you use it, right? So, but it's been helpful to me. Like Gabor Mate's book was amazing. And the last chapter in that, one of the best spiritual chapters I've read in any book ever, anywhere, called All Is Not Lost, Addiction and the Spiritual Quest. So good.
Okay, well, I guess it's sort of time to wrap up. I actually haven't read Austin's book yet, but I'm probably going to be placing an order fairly soon, because I've really enjoyed talking, and I really appreciate, you know, those kind of clarities and discernments in terms of like, you know, it's kind of tough, you know, being a creative person. It's quite easy to get confused, and you know, something I'm predisposed to is kind of like, I'm going to do it all myself.
Yeah.
I don't need advice. Thank you very much. It's that kind of thing. And like learning more and more, there really is no such thing as a sort of lone creator. I like what you were saying earlier about that you can be paired with people who excel at your weaknesses, and that's actually really fucking good. It's like that's so enjoyable because again there's that sense of connection, again there's that sense of meaning, and again there's that sense of actually making a difference, and I'm creating something. And like for me, that's it. That's where it's at.
There's also a resource. If the people go to my website, www.austinhillshaw.com, and they scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, over, I think on the left-hand side, there's something that says Get Unstuck. And if you click on that, there's what's called the Free Creators Cheat Sheet, which basically gives you an outline of everything that I'm talking about, really succinct on 2 sheets of paper there. And, pertaining to what you just said, Richard, about, it's really, again, creativity, that flow state is a paradox, and it consists of, insights are, each individual has their own unique lens on the world, okay? So we want to value the individual, okay? You see the world differently than I do. Your experience is unique in the world. Your experience in this moment is unique in the universe. There's never going to be anybody ever in the history of time having the experience you're having right now, right? So that's unbelievably precious. And yet when we go to create things in the world, we're never doing it in isolation. There's no such thing as a vacuum. That in itself is the paradox. And I think like for example, if you look at both Newton and Einstein, they both said at some point in their lives, if I've seen any more, it's on standing on the shoulders of giants. It's like, yes, I took a leap here, right? But my leap was based on all these other people's work. And my work will be also eclipsed by other people's work in the future, right? That is the nature of things. We want to honor ourselves as individuals, okay? And really recognize that each one of us has a unique story and gift to bring to the world. And we do that by bringing it into the collective, sharing what we have with people, getting critiques, helping people refine us, right? Ed Catmull of Pixar and Disney, president of both those companies, and is an amazing advocate of these things. It's like, fail early. All our movies suck in the beginning, right? We need to get them before we're in production to really get them critiqued and massage them so we can be the best stories possible. So that we start to get the designers and the technicians on mode, then, when you're sharing out collectively, that you're actually able to do it on budget and on time, right? So those are ways that you can sort of organize your life, and recognizing one, honor yourself, but also honor the web of interdependence that makes your life possible, right?
Mm. Yeah. Well, it's just been lovely catching up.
Yeah, out of the blue after a decade.
Yeah.
We were able to overcome the technology too. That was amazing.
Exactly. Yeah. It's been kind of fun.
We did it.
But I think what I always appreciate, and I think it's a good sign, is where it's sort of like you just start off again on exactly the same, where you left off. It's just kind of like, oh well, here we go.
Yeah. My dearest friends, I really actually have no idea what's going on in their lives. It's always just a conversation that keeps on going, which I love.
Yeah.
And it feels good to have reconnected with you, Richard. I remember that quote you once sent me from the New Yorker, I think it was. There was a New Yorker cartoon, since we were in retreat together, did a lot of meditation. It said something like, his silence really annoys me, which I thought it's such like specific kind of Buddhist humor, but so funny. Like, yeah. It's like, all right, now you're annoyed by silence. What do you
where do you go from there? It's like, yeah.
Exactly. So anyways, yeah. And thank you for everybody out there for listening as well. This is, without everybody out having interest in this, there's no conversation. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that about, friendship is an ongoing conversation. I like that. And that's, yeah. Okay. Well, take care.
Yes, thank you.
Day here is just ending. Day there is just Ramping up.
Yeah, I got to run off to a design meeting.
Nice. Okay. Take care.
Yeah, let's talk again sometime soon, Richard.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.